Alrighty, we are live.
I think we just lost Lynn. Hi, everybody. We'll get started really soon. Tiara, you want to?
Yes, I will go ahead and lead us out. Yes. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Tiara Wright. I am with the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio, and also the Miami Valley Urban League. I am a financial coach here at the Urban League. Today, we bring you our Wealth Building Wednesday series. It is a partnership with Fifth Third that we share information on things of building wealth. So credit, savings, budgeting, all of those good things that will increase your wealth. So I will go ahead and pass it off to our wonderful partnership with Fifth Third, Miss Maria Rutherford Long.
Thank you so much, Tiara. And it is a wonderful partnership. Happy Wednesday. And happy summer, everybody. We are so excited that you could join us today. Fifth Third Bank is proud to partner with the national and the local urban leagues all across our 11-state footprint. This partnership with the Urban League of Southwest Ohio is very, very close to my heart, as I serve on the board of the Miami Valley Urban League, and my other colleague, Roy Sutton, is on the Cincinnati the Southwest Ohio Urban League, and our leader, Kala Gibson, serves on the National Urban League Board. We find it so wonderful that we get to partner with such a great organization. And every week, every day, that Financial Empowerment Center, led by the Urban League, is out there in the trenches, trying to help you and your family build the wealth that you need to pass on generationally. And so it is our goal that every family is able to build wealth, to buy a home, to fulfill your financial dreams, whether that's starting a business, buying a new car, setting up a college savings. We are invested in this goal for you and for your families. So without any further from me, I want to introduce you to our host tonight. She will be leading our discussion on credit, and it is going to be lively. I need you to lean in, and if you join us and are participatory, we may even have some giveaways at the end. So without any further from me, I want to give you the director of the Financial Empowerment Center, Ms. Lynn Lewis. Lynn, I think you're on mute.
You guys can't read my lips?
No, I got to get that skill set.
All right, well, great. So I want to start out by saying also, again, thanks to Rachel and Todd for joining us today. I don't know if Maria shared with you guys, because I went away for a second, but we have a combined years of nearly 40 years of experience in this industry on our panel today. So please be sure that you do put all your questions in the chat, or feel free to ask questions as we go along, because you are actually in the presence of some experts in our area. So to get us started, I would like to ask for Rachel and Todd to share a little bit about yourselves, and then we'll dive right into the questions. Rachel, would you want to get us started?
Yeah, so I've been with consumer credit counseling since 1998, doing housing and credit counseling. I enjoy talking to people, listening to different scenarios and trying to help them sort their finances out. We offer a lot of programs at the Homeownership Center. I do credit and credit counseling. We offer a debt management program. Talk to people. Everyone that we talk to, we ask income and their monthly spending before we look at their credit and talk about ways to achieve their financial goals. Sometimes it is home ownership, of course, with the Homeownership Center. So some people are just looking to purchase a house, and we'll work with them as long as it takes to get them credit ready, income sufficient, affordability to purchase a home. So I've been doing it for a while and I enjoy it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Todd?
Yes, thank you so much. I just wanted to say thanks again to the Urban League and to Fifth Third for having us participate tonight. I'm Todd Moore from Trinity Debt Management, and it's great to be with you. Credit is one of these topics that is an absolute passion for me personally and for the office. I've been with Trinity Debt Management now for at least 15 years. Consider myself a student of credit scoring. I'm always learning something new. I try to pass that along to the folks that I'm working with. My work is really focused in trying to really see our city, Cincinnati, and I live in the Middletown area, but really trying to, I want our families to be successful long-term. So I've been working in this area of credit for, partnering with good folks like Fifth Third and the Urban League. My goal really is to make certain that our families are stable and building wealth, and Trinity is committed to that vision. So we really appreciate the opportunity to be with everyone tonight.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Todd. So let's get started with our panel discussion. So we know that we live in a credit-driven society. Mm-hmm. There may be opportunities for, some of us to buy things with cash, but for the big things that we need, like cars and motorcycles or boats or homes, it does require credit. So tell me your definition of what credit is. What is credit, to help our audience to understand from a layman's terms, because we know what the internet may say, and if they do some Google searches, they may find a lot of different definitions of credit. But how do you guys define credit?
Sure. Rachel, you want to take that one first and I'll follow up?
So defining credit would be items that you pay on time and not using cash. You're paying it over time. So your credit is a security risk, it's a risk factor, that you pay your bills on time, and so that people would be more apt to lend to you for your history of payments in the past. So it's a measurement of the amount of risk a creditor will take to lend to you again. So if your credit is poor, they will not lend to you. If it's good, then they will lend to you. If it's excellent, they'll lend to you with the better terms. So the terms of your credit will change with your past history. Mm-hmm. Or lack of history.
So I'll just follow up. There's a beauty to credit. One of the things that I see, and this, not to get overly technical, but credit allows us to finance things that we would not otherwise have cash for, mm-hmm. And to pay for those items over an extended period of time. So the wonderful thing about credit is most of us don't have large reserves of cash that we're able to go and tap into and to make large purchases, even if it's a car. So we have to have this concept. How do we finance something through a period of time? So credit allows us to do that, allows us to borrow and allows us to finance items that we could not otherwise pay cash for. Now, having said that, oftentimes a lot of folks that I work with, they have very negative view towards credit. They think, oh no, I've got declined for this. What am I supposed to do? Maybe the bank doesn't want to lend to me. There is no, where I think things get confusing oftentimes is credit is not a bad thing. Credit is a wonderful thing. We can't build wealth. We can't really achieve, some of these larger purchases that we call the American dream, a home, for example, without having access to credit. So, I hope that as we go through tonight that we understand that credit is a good thing. We have to have it. It is something that allows us to finance things through time, and that using credit appropriately allows us to have access to all sorts of things, whether that is a home, a car, or even, as we talked about earlier, becoming a business owner, which is something I'm very passionate about in our community. But credit, simply put, is the ability for us to use funds that we would not have. It's the concept of being able to borrow to finance things through time.
So, and I think, Todd, you touched a little bit on what I was going to lead into next, is why credit is so important in our lives. So credit allows us to purchase big ticket items that we normally wouldn't have a lot of reserve money set aside for to purchase. And it's a good thing. So besides from being able to purchase things, what other reasons would you see the credit would be important in our lives?
Oh, sure. There's many reasons. I mean, one, obviously we talk about the items that, car, a home, a small business. Those are some of those items that we're all very familiar with, but there's also other things that we need credit for. I mean, oftentimes in practical terms, we'll work with a lot of folks who obviously we need a place to live. So in terms of having access to being able to rent an apartment or have a place to live, even in that, as basic as that sounds, for many of our families, having a bad credit score, this can be a real challenge in terms of having adequate credit just to be able to find a place to live. So largely I think about this, not necessarily in just the big ticket items, but, we often think about these larger purchases, but, many of us, and maybe even some of the folks on the call tonight, are new to credit, and they need to be able to say, okay, maybe I don't actually have a credit score at this time. What can I do to actually build some credit? So, in this case, looking, just being able to think about how we establish a secured credit line. Maybe we'll get into some of those topics tonight, that small step that leads us into some of these larger purchases, but just being able to build credit. But again, I go back, I'm so stuck on these larger purchases, but when we really get down to it, I mean, access to credit, I often go back to the the home ownership experience, or maybe even just an apartment. Not having a credit score can preclude us from things when folks are asking us for our capacity, some measure of our capacity. And the credit score itself, in terms of being able to have access to those types of things, that's where things get difficult. Rachel?
So I usually use their 5 items that people will pull your credit report, even if you have no credit. They're going to pull your credit report if you rent. They're going to pull your credit report. Your utility companies pull credit. Employers pull credit. Insurance companies pull credit. And of course, the purchases, your credit score counts. So with renting and getting insurance and employment and utilities, they are just looking for collections and past bills that you owe. So a utility company might pull a credit report just to see what kind of payment history you have, same as insurance companies. I'm thinking that insurance companies will pull credit, but they're not basing your payment anymore off from your credit score, which they used to do. And employers will be I believe they're still allowed to pull credit. I know there's been some talk about having them stop being able to do that. And again, it might not stop you from getting a job, but if there are 2 people vying for the same job with the same criteria, maybe they'll use someone that doesn't pay their bills on time as a reason not to hire them. I know that employers will look to see if there are any judgments out there, because they don't want to have the hassle of garnished wages. So there are lots of reasons that people are going to look at your credit. And if something that you're trying to get a rental and you have some past mistakes, you just want to have an explanation if they are willing to listen to your story. Same with employment. And utility companies are just looking at past due utilities and may charge you a little more money if you don't pay utilities with a good payment history.
So the credit has a wide variety of reasons for its importance then. It's as I said earlier, we live in a credit-driven society. Yeah. So it sounds like then it just affects every part of our lives, whether you're trying to find a job, whether you're trying to find an apartment, whether you're trying to purchase something, go to Macy's or Home Depot, or if you're trying to buy a car, if you're trying to buy a house. I mean, it's like, credit has an impact on just about every facet of our lives. So it definitely is important for us to make sure that we can establish credit, but then once we get it established, it's good to make sure that we keep our credit on the good side and not on the bad side. So that's going to lead me into asking a couple of questions about your credit report and your credit score. Now, I know during the COVID era, you could pull your credit report as much as you needed to because of the pandemic, because of COVID. But I know that also went away. I think it was April of this year. So
I think they've stretched it out.
Did they
because the
stretch it
last
out?
time
Oh,
I've used that
good.
website, it was still, you can pull your report.
cool.
It might be through July now.
Okay.
I'm not positive, but
Good.
I was surprised because I thought it
Yeah.
had stopped too.
Yeah, okay, good. Thank you for that correction, Rachel. So you still have the ability then to pull your credit report as much as you need to make sure that everything is the way it needs to be. But when it comes to credit report pulling, what are you guys' thoughts on how often you should do it? Not necessarily thinking in the pandemic era, but as we transition out of the pandemic, what's some advice or insights as to how often you guys think that we should pull our credit report?
Well, I'll tell you, I answered this a couple different ways. I mean, certainly pulling the report itself is soft. It's a soft pull, as a soft inquiry. So there's no detrimental impact to the score or anything like that. It doesn't necessarily lower the score. I've been trying to approach it in a very strategic way. So folks that maybe accumulated some outstanding debt during the COVID period, you have a number of families who either lost wages or lost jobs, that may have accumulated some outstanding debts. So oftentimes what I'll do is we'll pull a credit report, gives us a baseline score, and then we'll set and try to align a number of specific goals. So if we say we need a credit score that's X, I try to basically, we need enough time in there to actually see the model function. So as they're reducing debts or maybe even reestablishing some of their payment history, maybe they've been late on some payments, those sorts of things. So I try to time it in a way. I'm actually working with some folks where I'm pulling in about every 90 days. Now, this is not going to be broad rule for all folks that are on the call, but I've been trying to approach, just pulling that report in a strategic way so that as I'm working with a number of folks at Trinity, I'm saying, okay, here's our baseline. This is what we hope to obtain. Many of them either want some form of loan. Oftentimes, getting a home is the larger goal for a lot of the families I'm working with right now. But because of some of their outstanding debts, they're aggressively paying off debts, but they really want to make certain that score is moving. They want to see it move. So I've been pulling those reports about every 90 days just to give the families motivation so they can reduce their outstanding debts and just keep them moving forward. Otherwise, absent that scenario, I might look at, if I'm working in counseling with someone, it may be a longer period of time. It might be every 6 months. Depends on how aggressively that person or that family is actually working through that process. But, at minimum, I would like to see folks pull that credit report at least once a year to take a look to see, if there's been any changes to that report, whether it's outstanding debts or other issues that they may be working on. But oftentimes I try to really be very strategic and align whatever goals we have for them to that credit report, just to that factor, that inquiry factor, just to make certain that we keep everything aligned to that larger credit scoring goal. So COVID, 3 months, if we're working on the score and we got folks that are very aggressive, maybe a 6-month check-in to see where those folks are at, depending on their debt level. And absolute minimum, I'd like to see folks, pull their score once a year.
So I take it a little differently. I want to see that somebody has made some change. Like you're saying, not all my clients make big changes in 3 months' time. Mm-hmm. So I'm more like, what are you doing? What have you done? Is there a reason for me to pull the credit report? And as you mentioned, you want to give those changes a chance to hit the score. So it takes a while for because you said, like I just talked to a lady who has now paid her debts on time for 5 months. Mm-hmm. Her score is still very low because of other reasons. So there are mitigating factors to people that have quick access to their credit scores through their credit card I know I get mine every month, or Credit Karma. You want to look at those things as a, like you're saying, have a baseline and then work up from there. If this is where your credit was when I pulled your credit report, and you knew about where your score was on whatever access you have, because a lot of people have access to scores, to make some changes, give those changes a time to change your score before I go in and do another pull. I'm sure that Trinity's and our pulls, I know our pulls are soft. I still don't want to do an excessive amount of pulls. But generally speaking, when I'm out in the public and talking to people about credit, the old annualcreditreport.com that you could pull one credit report from each of the 3 reporting agencies once every 12 months would see you looking at your credit report every 4 months. So you pull one and then you pull the next one, then you pull your next one. So you're throughout the year pulling a credit report. And in those, you're not getting a score. You're just checking for what's on your credit report. Are things being reported, paid as agreed? Are there any identity theft or something like, whoa, where'd this come from? Why do I owe this bill? And so you call on it and you find out about it early, so you can do something about it. So that a little bit is annoying. It's not annoying. It's just something you have to take with grain of salt, that somebody has their Credit Karma score, and every time there's a blip on their credit, and I know from my own self with the score I get through my credit card that it's not here. It fluctuates 20 to 30 points. It is not the FICO score that I would pull. That's the other question we have here. It's not the score. I can tell by how high it is that it's not. If I pull my credit report through the scoring mechanism that we use, that mortgage companies pulled, I don't think my score would be that high. I'm at least realistic about that. But I will try to pull my own and my husband's credit reports every year, one from each of the 3 reporting agencies, just to check for identity theft and errors. And I do think that it depends on what your goal is in mind of how often you want to pull that score, how often you actually care to pull a score that you know is more like a bank's going to pull. So I think that we're getting off the internet and off our credit card apps or Credit Sesame. It's good that we have that. Some people get too obsessed with it when it changes minutely.
Lynn, if I could just follow up on that just for a moment.
Too.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that there are many credit monitoring organizations out there. And if you have a bank account with a financial institution, I bet they have one too. Fifth Third Bank has one. For a nominal fee every month, they monitor my credit. I get reports monthly. And so that's an easy way to monitor it, because I'm not sure that Credit Karma, as Rachel stated, gives you what's real time. It can fluctuate and it's not really what the bank would see. So just wanted to share that. Thanks, Rachel.
Todd, what were you going to add?
Oh, yeah, not to belabor the point, but oftentimes what I've seen is particularly folks who are really aggressive about where they're really working hard on their credit report, they'll start to get a little obsessed about the score. They want to see it move. I always try to remind them that we can't buy time. Now what I mean by that is we pay a number of debts, but we still need to allow time to function through this model so we can actually start to see that score move through time. You know, I had just recently someone paid quite a lot on some of their outstanding accounts, and you know, they wanted to start to pull a credit report really pretty much every month to see where things were going. And it's really kind of what Rachel is saying there as well, is we still need to allow, we can't buy time. So even having paid those types of debts down, we still have to allow time to allow that model to start to show some progress. So pulling that credit report, if you're obsessed about seeing where that score is moving, still need to allow yourself some time to allow that model to function so you can see the gains that you're actually making.
So it doesn't happen in 2 weeks.
Right. It doesn't happen in 2 weeks. Yes.
So
I was going to piggyback off that, Todd. Thank you for that. So for everybody watching on Facebook and our participants, think of it like dieting. While you're in it, you won't see it. But when you look back and reflect over it, you'll see what happened. So let me just give you a real-time example. Let's say you get a bonus, $500, or you get an inheritance. What I would recommend as a financial counselor of more than 5 years is to maybe divvy that up into $250 per month, or even $100 extra for the next 5 months if you want the greatest result. Obviously, again, that's going to depend on working with your financial coach, but you're going to see a bigger move in your credit score by breaking it down than doing that lump sum fast payment as Todd was referring to, and then look back, to try it that way.
thank you guys for that feedback input. So someone, I think it was Rachel, started out mentioning about the Credit Karmas, Credit Sesames of the world. I know we hear a lot from our participants that they use one of those or one of the others that may be out there. What I'd like for you guys to share with us, the difference between a Credit Karma, Credit Sesame, and a MyFICO. And are they the same? I think we've already kind of sort of answered that part, but if you could elaborate on it a little bit more to help our audience understand the differences, and then understand which is the most important to work towards and strive towards obtaining as far as a credit score is concerned.
Well, certainly Credit Karma, Credit Sesame, these sites have really gotten quite a lot of attention. Folks use them. I'm certain the coaches in Urban League, I'm certain that folks are talking about it a lot in those counseling sessions. There is some differences when we think about the score that's actually generated from Credit Karma. They are using a FICO score, but they're using what's called a Vantage score. So it's factored. You'll still see those core factors in there: payment history, outstanding debts. Those 5 factors that we talk about for credit scoring. But it's calculated as a Vantage score, which is different than the Beacon score and some of the other scoring models that are used. So it doesn't, there's about a 30-point swing one way or the other in terms of it. It's inaccurate. In other words, it's not going, if you're using that for assumptions about your credit, or you're really strategic and you're working hard, I would encourage you to go and, work with your counselor at the Urban League, work with Fifth Third, make certain that you're using a model that's going to reflect your score in an accurate way. The Vantage score, while it gives you information, it's not a score that is used for lending purposes. So you're not going to find Fifth Third using that type of model, the Vantage score model, for their lending practices. So when you're thinking about your credit score, obtaining that score from any of the 3 major credit bureaus, or using those scores that are generated at Fifth Third, are going to give you an accurate and timely read. So the main thing I see there is a lot of wasted energy and time when we focus entirely on the Vantage score, because folks are working really hard. One gentleman I've worked with now for over a year, just trying to build his credit. About 6 months of that, he was really focused on Credit Karma. He was using that as his model, and he just got frustrated. He's like, why is this thing not working? So we had to have this very conversation about, well, it's just inaccurate. We went through a very similar situation, but at least from what I understand, again, those scores that are calculated through Credit Karma, Credit Sesame, Vantage score, still produced by FICO, but it's not used for lending practices. And when you pull that score, there's usually that swing. So in doing this work, it really, time is very important for us. We need to get, we want timely information to be able to get the score that we need to obtain the loan that we need. So There is differences in those scoring models. Even across the three bureaus that you'll find, credit scoring models will vary. But I just encourage folks that are on the call, reach out to the Urban League, reach out to folks at Fifth Third, use a model that's going to be used for lending practices as opposed to Credit Karma and Credit Sesame, because the models are not the same.
Rachel, do you have any additional insight to share?
I do. It's not that I think that people shouldn't be using those. I just think they should use them with a grain of salt and look for trends. I think if you're working on your credit, you can use that as is my score trending upward? Is it staying about consistent? I also think, yeah, so that's, I try not to poo-poo it. Also, with those, that's the score, that is the Vantage score, that's usually higher. It's not always higher either. So I don't try to second guess it, but I know with Credit Karma, I'm not that familiar with Credit Sesame, but with Credit Karma, you can get a copy of your report at any time you want. It's a soft pull, and the full report. And I think that people are obsessed with, and I'm more familiar with Credit Karma. That's what I get the most calls about. More looking at them categorizing it like, no, this is bad on my credit. I'm going, what was that? I like to look at the whole credit report and be able to tell them what they need to do, where they'll be focusing on getting another credit card, but then they have all this debt they need to pay off. So getting them to look at the big picture instead of how at least Credit Karma seems to focus on what's changing. And they sell a lot of products. So my story about Credit Karma is I had a client whose credit was good. They paid everything on time, but they had gotten overextended because every time Credit Karma said, hey, your credit will improve if you just took out this credit card, they did it. And they ended up being overextended. So they had a little too much. We talked about it and got them a way to power pay it off, and they're fine. They just needed to have a little halt and let's look realistically at what we're doing.
So then if I'm hearing you guys both correctly, then your recommendation and thoughts is to maybe use Credit Karma or Credit Sesame as maybe an educational tool to help them to see maybe, where their credit could be going, but not necessarily bank on that to be the end all be all. Because I mean, just from my research and working with FICO Open Access, I know that about 90% of the lenders that are across the United States use my FICO or use the FICO score. So therefore, getting to your point, Todd, if someone is focusing strictly on the Credit Karma and Credit Sesame as their benchmark for how they're doing, but then they try to go to a bank and they pull their FICO score and they don't qualify because it may be 20 or 30 points difference, I can see your perspective of they feel like they've wasted their time, whether they do it for. But then, from Rachel's perspective, if someone is really trying to monitor and see how they're progressing and if what they're doing is really working, I can see where that could be an advantage to a degree, but still understanding and recognizing that my FICO is the end all be all when it comes to going to a lender, especially if you want to try to get a house. You really need to focus on my FICO because, a lender is going to pull what's called a tri-merge, which is going to be the medium of all three FICO scores to get them into that house. So I can see where the Credit Karmas and the Credit Sesames could have a little bit of benefit if they want to try to educate themselves, but understanding ultimately my FICO is really the gold standard when it comes to credit scores.
And Lynn, you are absolutely correct. So many people will come back and say, and I'm sure you all, and you and the coaches have heard, but my Credit Sesame said this was my score. And then when they pulled it at the bank, they said it was this. It is different. Thank you so much for having this conversation, because people need to be ready for that so that they aren't upset when they find out the difference. Thank you so much.
And I think the other thing, my FICO does not advertise like Credit Karma and Credit Sesame. So that, I think that's the other thing that drives people towards the big shiny ornament you know, because they're out there, they're marketing, they're advertising their product. So naturally people are going to want to gravitate to something that they see more often than what they, you know, what they don't see, excuse me, with my FICO. So we're talking about credit scores. So why is my credit score different? Did anybody say anything to that effect? Why is my credit score different from one bureau to another? Why is my if I do get a FICO score and it's with TransUnion, and I get a FICO score and it's with Experian or Equifax, they will be different. But why? Anybody want to tackle that question?
I'll try to tackle it in part. There's well, as we look at those again, as we look across those three bureaus, so to differentiate themselves in the market, you know, you have the Equifax score, the Beacon score will start 300 to 850, and then the other scores, I think one starts at 425. I'm more familiar with the Equifax and the Beacon score than I am the other models, only because that's the one that I use so often and kind of base all my assumptions around that 300 to 850. But you know, again, in terms of just generating the scores itself, factors will be the same. You know, we've got those core factors, payment history, outstanding debts, et cetera. So those are all going to be the same across all three models, but the math starts in a different place. So if you were to pull a TransUnion report, because it has a different baseline, starts in a different place, doesn't start at 300, you're going to see that math kind of vary out there. And oftentimes that can be confusing for folks, because if they've pulled one report and not pulled, you know, if they haven't pulled a FICO or a Beacon score, that 300 to 850 range, you know, again, folks that are really diligent and working hard, trying to pay off their debts and want to see that score, if they see that range is not what they expected and they have that other report, we oftentimes have to just, you know, again, just educate folks about how those models vary and why that math is a little bit different. But in terms of why they started there, from my own research, I think it's primarily to differentiate themselves in the market, having those three bureaus, so that we don't have, you know, if you think about risk analysis, we had everything stored at just Equifax. You know, I would hope that as accurate as they try to be, you know, it's also good, I think, to have some other folks in the market so that we don't have everything leveraged all in one, you know, organization. So you have the three models, they produce different, their math starts in a little bit different place. They produce a little bit different, the numbers are a little bit different, but the actual core work that they're doing for analysis is primarily the same. But differentiating themselves in the market certainly is part of why we see those three bureaus and why they generate different scoring systems or models.
So
And, the other factor is that not all, especially collection agencies, but not all creditors report to all three credit bureaus. So that will make it change. And I think it's good to know that even though that I pull a tri-merge with the three scores on it that like a mortgage company will pull, those are going to vary. You know, as Todd said, they're just going to vary. They have different algorithms that they use, and they're always going to vary. So, and the middle score is what's used. I'm not sure, because with Credit Karma, you get TransUnion and Equifax scores. You don't get the Experian. I have some clients with an Experian app. It's still off from when I pull that credit report. It's off. But it is the middle score that's used in for housing. So just, I think people need to know that.
okay, great, appreciate that. So yeah, so the scores will vary. Like you guys said, what I found interesting is that it varies, I guess, by region. So like TransUnion is in our region because they're here in Ohio. So it would make sense if a local company in the Midwest reported to who's in Atlanta, Equifax or Experian? Equifax is in Atlanta.
I think it's
That wouldn't make any sense if I'm going to a local jewelry store, they wouldn't want to pay the money to report to a credit bureau out of Atlanta, or they wouldn't want to report to Experian either. So that definitely probably has an impact on our scores being different because the same creditors aren't reporting to all 3 bureaus. But then also your credit score is fluid. And what I mean by fluid is that it can change anytime and every time it feels like it wants to change. It wants to change. So that can be a challenge also, and with your credit scores being different. I think I want to talk a little bit now about different credit scenarios that we sometimes experience here at the Urban League, and I'm sure you guys have probably experienced it as well, and also to try to dispel some credit myths. We have about 15 minutes left to go, so I think it is important that we talk a little bit about some of the credit myths that are out there, or talk a little bit about some of the scenarios that we've come across here at the Urban League, and maybe give you guys experience on how you've addressed that before. One scenario was about a car with my ex, and he or she did not make the payment. So now my credit is messed up. What can I do?
Sure.
Anybody want to tackle that one?
Yeah, well, this one gets, I've absolutely come across this before. It does happen. So first thing we want to look at here is whether or not this is, if this is a joint account. And we had, oftentimes in car loans, I don't necessarily see it in terms of joint accounts, but if somehow we've gotten, if there's anything that's joint there, I mean, there's really, that's a serious problem, because if he or she, however this relationship worked out, because the one party did not keep their obligation, they didn't make the payments to the bank, the car was repossessed, whatever it might be, now both parties are in trouble. We both have a low score and we have to dig our way out of this problem. But again, so there's really no easy way. There's no way to really separate that in terms of scoring. Once the damage is done, both parties are going to have a lower score. So if the repossession took place and the score is damaged, now we have to do the work to actually reposition that score. We have to move that score up. But building positive payment history, that's a whole different conversation, which we can have. But I'm just trying to, Rachel, you want to take over from here?
Yeah,
I'm just
so
trying to separate that.
in my experience with a repossessed vehicle that both 2 names were on it, and it ended up getting repossessed, and the person didn't even, part of it was, if I had known that car wasn't making the payments, I would have made the payments and gotten the car. I would have gotten the car. By the time it was like it already been repossessed. I'm not sure if it had been sold yet. I did have one situation where the bank or the loan holder was willing to take, because it was a joint account, was willing to negotiate a settlement for half of the balance. And I'm not sure how they were going to report it to the credit bureau, but they did a negotiation for half the balance, and I think they were going to zero it out. It was probably a settlement that she was able to negotiate, and she had already done that negotiation. They were going to take that payment over time, and it was over a year long that they were going to take a monthly payment. So it was already repossessed, already been sold. So she was just paying on that old car that she wasn't able to drive. And that's where I find it hard to convince my clients to negotiate settlements, because they just feel so hurt and sullied by it. But if they want no one's going to lend to you with that large amount still owing. And you also have the possibility that if you don't take care of it, then your wages could get garnished. So it is like Todd says, it's a careful consideration about your options, all options, but at least try to negotiate with whoever's holding the debt. So I do have a client who I think owes $6,000 on a repossessed vehicle, and she was offered a settlement of like a third of it, like $2,000, if she could pay it off in they would probably take payments over time. she was not able to take advantage of that. But the older the car is, the longer it's been charged off, the more apt the person will be to settle the debt. If they know the other person, so if I'm talking to somebody and they say, my husband, he, lost his job, he's not working, or he's, got this doing some side jobs, so they can't come after him. That's why they're coming after you. So he was the main person to make the payments. For some reason, when they got a divorce, he took the car, he was making the payments. It's not like her liability for that loan has gone away, but they've done everything they could to try to get this other guy to pay, and he's not going to pay. So now they're coming after you. And by the way, you have good income. They could very well garnish those wages if you don't try to settle it or take other options. But yeah, that's what I've experienced over my time.
So it sounds like they just have to, both parties have to face it so they can fix it.
That's
They
right.
have to face what the challenge is, the problem is, so they can move forward and fix it. Either work with, if it's been repossessed, work with paying off the debt, work with fixing their credit, and try not to ever do it again, as far as co-signing on someone's loan, if at all possible, or unless you're willing to assume that debt. That's the other option. If you're willing to assume that debt, then co-sign, but if not, buy cars, buy houses, whatever, individually.
Right. Lynn, I was going to mention one other thing too, because I've actually dealt quite a few times with folks in this exact situation. It's one of the things I want to try to encourage folks on the call about. If you've been in that situation, we also need to get the good stuff going. That is, we also have to build some positive history. So let's say in this situation that you have $7,000 that you owe on a car repossession because of your ex. What I want folks to understand is, for credit scoring purposes, we still have to have something good reporting to the credit bureau. So we can't just focus entirely on this one debt. We also have to start building some positive payment history as we're paying down the debt. So a lot of times I'll see folks, they get overwhelmed by this debt, which is a concern. I mean, when we have an outstanding debt like that, and it keeps us from these larger purchases or just being able to have a higher score, certainly I understand that. But in terms of time and looking at this challenge that we have for outstanding debt, one positive that you can take away from this, and hopefully folks will see this, is if we want to rebuild the score, we can't just focus on that car loan. We could use something, we could talk to Fifth Third, get a secured credit line. We build that positive payment history as we're paying down our outstanding debt, this car loan, for instance, so that as we're moving through time, our outstanding debt is reduced, and that we're also, using 6 or 8 months of positive payment history. So these two factors that are in our score, payment history and outstanding debt, are working together to really empower us, strengthen our score through time. So the scenario itself is very common, but I just want to encourage folks, if you are in a situation like that, focusing entirely on the debt itself, even paying on that is not going to see that score move through time in the same manner it would if you were also working to establish positive history as you're working to pay off that debt. I hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good insight. So you're working both angles, so to speak.
Both angles.
You're working to correct the bad debt, but then you're also trying to build new debt as you go along.
Positive history, yes.
Yeah.
Because once that debt's gone, I always tell my clients, 2 lines of credit paid for 24 months on time, and your credit score will be up once that old debt's paid. So if you can start that payment history now with small little accounts, that's the way to build on it.
Okay, great insight, guys. So here is a myth. A family or friend told me that if I close the cards I'm not using, that will help my score. I don't want to say that's necessarily a myth. I'm going to say that's just a statement. Mm-hmm. And you guys tell me, is that a myth or is that the truth? Or
So it close an open account that just, you never use it and it's an open account. So I would have to see the actual situation to know, like I say, see what else is going on. If they don't have a lot of credit, maybe leaving that line open would be good. If they have a lot of extra credit and they're really not using it, leaving that line of credit open gives you an opportunity for somebody to take it and use it, identity theft. That's the negative. And if you don't pay on a credit card, or if you don't use a credit card in a year, a lot of times the creditor will close it down for you and it will be closed by creditor grantor. And that is not as if you close it yourself, there's a little better pull on that. But I usually tell my clients, if they're not, but it does, I would have to, the credit mix, what else is going on would play into the answer to that question. So as a blanket statement, it's kind of, well, I guess, but not necessarily. I've seen it hurt a credit report to see a bunch of accounts closed. It's sometimes that's what somebody needs to do if they've just got too many cards open, I believe. So
I would say if it's their oldest line of credit, so let's say they have 5 cards and that's their oldest, then definitely leave it open, because you're going to close that history, which is a piece of the credit scoring system. So we want to keep the longest history. So keep it open. Now, let's say this client has 10 credit cards and just recently opened a Victoria's Secret card. I'm just throwing that one because that's one of the most common ones that I see. A store credit card, and she has impulsive spending habits. Then as a financial coach, I might recommend go ahead and closing that, because it's only 6 months old. It's not going to do as much damage. So you always want to keep that older history open. I say if you're trying to rebuild or repair, just some action steps as we wrap up today, because I know we've given you all a lot of information. Just from me personally as a financial coach, is stop using the credit. Don't close your credit cards, but start using a cash only system and really budgeting, really watching your budget, sitting down with your banker. The next step is maybe taking on extra hours, taking on overtime, and taking that overtime hour or two, and then applying that to an extra payment towards your credit card. So now you're reducing your debt payment, which is another piece of that credit scoring model. So you have your history and the amount of debt owed. And then keeping the relationship with your bank. A lot of times the difference between a pre-approval can be just knowing the bank and having a conversation with them. I've consolidated a lot of credit by getting a personal loan and taking $5,000 to turn that into one payment to pay off 4 different credit cards, so that now you're not doing a balancing act every single month. So those are my top 3, having been doing this for so long. And you should see success begin to happen after about 90 days or so. It's going to take a minimum of 90 days before you begin to see any changes.
So Todd, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I certainly, and as we talked about a number of scenarios, whether you close one, oftentimes I refer to this as the double whammy. It's not a textbook term, obviously, but FICO will always, part of the FICO rules is they would say, closing accounts that are open longer than 7 years in good standing. What you'll often see is a couple of different things happen. So when you close accounts, you break a couple rules. One is it removes those accounts from your credit history. And then also it can shift the credit debt ratio. And that's where I would agree with the coaches that we can certainly close some accounts as we're being strategic, but the key is to be strategic in doing that type of work. I've seen some folks that get really excited about paying off debts and they will just start to close accounts down. And then the idea is that, they're going to close the accounts, they're going to pay things down, and then they're hoping to have a higher score and they want to go and obtain a loan down the road. The problem with that is there's quite a lot of damage. You've done two different things. One, you remove things from the payment history, you've broken that rule, and you also, in many cases, have shifted the credit debt ratio. So if you have any active open accounts that are still in the report, taking all this other stuff out, it can make it look like you're carrying an actually a higher debt level, because the report's only going to look at what's open and active at that time. So your score will be modeled after what's open and active. So if you've pulled all of the other cards and all these other lines of credit out of your score, whatever is there that you have at that time will often reflect. So again, there's certainly ways to do this in a very strategic way that will have a minimal impact on your score. But I've actually seen some folks who really, that actually is a myth. I would classify it as a myth, is shutting these accounts down. I've seen it actually do quite a lot of damage. Even for folks that have, let's say that we're looking at maybe a 670, that's our goal. We want some type of home loan. At minimum, we're looking at a 670. I've seen folks that have closed accounts where doing that has set us back at least 6 months just generating a score, because they just pulled too many things out of their credit score. And now we've really got a lot of work to do to bring that score back around. I think the takeaway here is just really work with your financial coaches and work with folks to really be strategic about how you do it. It can be done in a smart way, but just, being aggressive and just closing things down, I think it would do quite a lot of damage for credit scoring.
Well, thank you guys for your feedback and your input. It's about 6:28 now. So I want to begin to wrap up tonight's presentation. I do appreciate Todd, you and Rachel participating with us this afternoon. Thank you, as always, Fifth Third, for your support of our Wealth Building Wednesday. We are planning out our calendar for the remainder of the year. So look forward to us having some workshops dealing with maybe a financial SOS, meaning financial SOS. The white flag is going to go up, and hopefully we'll have a panel of experts that can be on to help our participants understand where to go when they have specific type of financial situations. We're also looking forward to having a small business panel later on in this year. We will be live and in living color in the city of Dayton, Ohio on October the 8th. Excuse me, I said November, October the 8th for our eBus event over there in the Dayton area. And then what else, Mario? What else? What did I leave out? There's one more that I left out.
The investment group, we're working to have a workshop on investments.
On investing, yes.
Yes.
So please,
an exciting end of the year.
Right. So please stay tuned. Be sure to like the Urban League's Facebook page. You will be provided with information through that resource as well. But if you want to be on our mailing list, either put your information in the chat, or you can send us an email at fec@ulgso.org. Give us your name, your email, and your phone number, and we'd be happy to put you on our mailing list. I do believe that is all for this evening. So thank you guys for your support, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night,
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Mhm.
Bye-bye.